paid if somebody gets readmitted in 30 days. So that incentivizes them to work with community partners or mental health association to do it. So how does that work in this system? You know, I mean, what's the thing that's gonna push people out?
Somewhat respond. You know, the new Jim Crow was mentioned, and one of the things that new Jim Crow opened with was one of the things that drove us towards mass incarceration was a financial incentive.
Yeah.
And so what happened was when it was early on talked about incarcerating people for minor drug crimes, police departments overall were resistant. And what changed the dynamic was federal incentives, which some of it we're seeing now. When you look at Ferguson and you saw the military vehicles and the military armor and the weapons, that was part of that financial incentive that came from the federal government to lock up more people.
I'd just like to make an observation. If we think it's bad here in New York State, think about California. California has one of the highest incarceration percentages in the United States. They were up to 174,000, and they were sued by inmates because they were not being provided with adequate medical or mental health care. They were found to be in default, and they were ordered to divest themselves of 40,000 inmates. It's a colossal mess in California right now, because what's happening is they went to their legislature and talking about reactive. They actually had their legislators change the way that they served felony sentences by pushing them down into the jail system in the counties. So what in effect you have is you have the state pushing this burden onto the counties because they couldn't handle all the incarcerated adults. They're also serving 10% of their sentences. There's 3 strikes and you're out, you're tough on crime. It's not sustainable. And I guess that's the frustrating part that I have, is that if we're talking about trying to be honest about the incarceration rate, if we over-incarcerate, we're going to go broke, and we're not going to be able to afford that. And there's no place better to see that than to look at what's happening in California and see the fallout that's taking place there and the total state of disarray that they're in there.
Doesn't the new legislation provide that all teenagers who commit, Class A and B felonies could be tried as adults?
Kids over felonies, absolutely.
We're
We're talking about misdemeanors and non-violent felonies only. The issue is not what you could be tried at, but where you might serve. So if you're 17 and you commit a violent felony, you still won't go into an adult facility. You may be in whatever facility you're in for a very long time, but you won't be in with adults. And the other thing is that we know the kinds of interventions that young people need, whether it's education or medical care or even pediatric issues, they're never going to get in an adult facility. So this is not a free pass. I think it's really important that we talk about that. If you're a violent offender and you're 16, you're not going to end up in family court. You're not going to end up in teen court, for sure. But you won't end up in a hardcore adult facility either. And we'll be able to, I think, provide what we need for a young person in their own maturation and their brain development. But it's important that we know that we're not talking about violent felonies. You're absolutely right. Thank you.
And also, it just seemed to me ironic that you mentioned that the
Excuse me.
I just have a question for Elaine regarding one of the kids at Center for Youth that you featured. You mentioned that his crime was getting into a car with a foster.
Not one of these boys, but another boy, yeah.
Okay, a foster care brother who had a gun and some very negative intentions.
Yeah.
Do you happen to know what happened with that foster family? Because that is a big issue for me. We have limited numbers of great foster care homes, and then I hear so many horror stories. Do you know what happened? Are they...
both those boys ended up in jail, and I think the family was no longer a foster care family. You know, one of this is a terrible statistic, but I will tell you that we know, I mean, and I happen to have very, very good friends and employees who are foster care parents, and I admire them. But the system itself has not been very effective. And so we find that within 5 years of leaving some of our systems, foster care system for one, that some of our young men in particular are back in another system. It's called the Department of Corrections. And I served on a governor's task force before this one, and when they came to present to us, you could see that they were forced to tell us the truth, and it was very, very troubling. Young women in foster care, within 10 years, about 25% of them are back in a system, again, the Department of Corrections. So it's very difficult, and we all know amazing foster care families. We admire them, but there are some serious problems. Sandra, you're absolutely right. I wish that we could figure out what to do and how to intervene, but that is a serious problem.
Thank you again for being here, for having this panel. With the statistics that you've given and the increase of young people being incarcerated, hasn't New York State done a lot to closing youth facilities instead of addressing, building those facilities specifically for youth?
Well, I don't know. We have closed youth development facilities. We've closed OCFS facilities. We're closing industry, but I don't think we've closed our jails. So, you know, the kinds of interventions we're going to have to, and that's why we're going to take 3 years really to do this right. We're going to figure out what we're going to do with these young people, right? If we're not going to put them in jail and put them away, what are we going to do with them? We're going to do things that are rehabilitative. We're going to get systems back in place. They're talking about hiring specialists in family engagement, trying to get them back home with some good case management. They're talking about having mentoring and groups together so that kids aren't just left out there. So we're going to have to figure out what if not jail. And you're right, we've closed industry, we've closed beds across the state. We're going to have to figure out the best way to respond to that.
Just wanted to bring one thing up. What's happening too is in New York State and across the country, the PREA, called Prison Rape Elimination Act, is causing significant changes in the way that jails and correctional facilities are run. Because part of the standards in that is 16 and 17-year-olds have to have sight and sound separation from adults older. And I know this because I was a retired jail superintendent. And it's a significant change that New York State jails are not going to be able to manage. So they're going to have to change it anyway, whether they take the kids out of the system or they build new facilities. But it's impossible to have total sight and sound separation of 16 and 17-year-olds from adults. It's just not feasible in most facilities.
Got some work to do, for sure.
Why don't we give our presenters a hand? Thank you for a very informative session.
Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us this evening for this important discussion. We're grateful to our excellent panel, Ed, Shani, Elaine. We're grateful to you, Reverend Hargrave, as our moderator, Asbury First United Methodist Church, all the members of our league, especially our Education Study Group and our Program Committee who made this forum possible. Our presenters have left us with some follow-up materials on the table as you leave. You'll also find some material on the League of Women Voters. We hope that we'll see you next month at our March Forum on the 23rd. And we'll be discussing the grand jury system with presentations by District Attorney Sandra Dorley and a representative of the Public Defender's Office. Before you leave, please take time to fill out the evaluation sheets. Either leave them on your chair or on the table. And please drive carefully. Thank you.